Let me introduce you to Gene. I heard Gene first at PETS last year, and I was just really kind of blown away with what she shared about literacy and her background. The theme this year is Rotary Connects the World. Bringing together people of the world is not a new concept in Rotary. Gene was awarded a Rotary International Ambassadorial Scholarship in 1989 that was begun in 1917 by Rotarians who saw the exchange of ideas between scholars to be one of the best ways to foster peace. Gene was a teacher of the deaf in Reno, Nevada for 7 years when she became frustrated with the low reading levels of her students. Rotary sent her to England to exchange ideas about literacy and deafness in working alongside a deafness research team at the University of Nottingham that was doing unique work in this field. She still teaches deaf in the middle and high school levels in Woodland, California. She is going to tell us a little bit about the Rotary investment of 30 years that has borne full fruit. So here she is.
I don't see a clock here, so I'm setting a timer. Okay. All right, because nobody likes the speaker to speak over. Thank you for. I didn't have a microphone. Good. Expert on deafness. It is so great to be here today, and I'd like to start my talk with the way things started for me in Nottingham. Probably had a similar experience as you did. I arrived at the airport, and there was this guy with a sign, and it said Irwin, and I went, "Well, look at that! That guy has the same name as me." And he's so proud of it. So I walked right by him, and over this loudspeaker it said, "Gene Irwin, come to the counter." And I said, "Oh, that was you." And he goes, "Yes." So then we get to the car, and he puts my suitcases in there and puts the trunk down, and he said, "Are you going to drive?" And I went, "Oh, that's right. Okay, in England, you get around to the other side of the car to be the passenger." Then we go to leave the parking lot, and a guy ran right in front of the car. He slammed on his brakes and said, "Stupid Pratt." And I said, "What did you say?" And he said, "Stupid Pratt, P-R-A-T-T, idiot." And I said, "That was my maiden name, Pratt." I mean, there's a really ambassadorial start out of there. Right after going there as well, I was asked, because this was called a Foundation Scholarship. In the Foundation Scholarship, back then, they paid your tuition and your transportation and a stipend for living in the dorms. And I had my 3-year-old daughter with me at the time, so they gave me that stipend and I rented a place. But so I went to Nottingham, and I think it was the second day. I picked up the phone, and this guy goes, "We would like you to come to our foundation dinner, and we would like you please to wear your native costume." And I thought, in my outward orientation, they didn't tell me I'd have to wear my native costume. Well, there were 2 other students there, exchange students, and they were Japanese, so they had a beautiful kimono thing going on. And then there was a guy from Texas, and he had a big 10-gallon hat and a belt buckle and these boots. He only had a 5-gallon brain. He was a lawyer student. But there he was. And I'm there from the state of Nevada, and I'm thinking, well, what's unique about my state? Well, we are the only nation, and the only state in our nation that has legalized prostitution. So I just went as the closest thing I could think of and went as a U.S. congressman. I went there, and we're talking about literacy, and I see that you're from the screen that your next week's speaker is going to be about literacy, so you're going to be hearing a lot about it. And I don't know how many of you have ever seen the movie The Reader? Seen the movie The Reader? Kate Winslet actually won Best Actress for that movie, and it had more male frontal nudity than I've ever seen in any film. And I don't even know what it was rated, but there was an awful lot of sex going on. Anyway, but there's a line from that movie where one of the characters says, "I'd like to make a donation to a Jewish organization for illiteracy." And the woman from the Jewish community said, "Well, illiteracy is not typically a Jewish problem. But we'll see that this donation gets to where you are. And when you think about it, you know, that line from the movie rings true. Because there's a community amongst Jewish people and they are known for their literacy. And I'm thinking, okay, how come it doesn't go like this? Hey, we're an organization, you know, that wants to donate money for America for literacy. And why aren't we saying, well, you know, literacy's not an American problem? But we don't say that. Why don't we? Okay, are Jewish kids any smarter than anybody else? They're not. We know that intelligence distribution is equal up in everybody. So our literacy commitment has to be very strong. And this is the thing about the deaf, is that a lot of people think, well, the deaf can read because they have eyes. And I'm going to explain to you that the deaf don't typically read above a 4th grade reading level, graduating from high school. And this is why. So, 2 slides. We're kind of operating off a little bit different. Well, anyway, I'm a Mac person. So, I want you're going to shout out this word. You're not going to shout out this word. You're going to shout out the color that it is written in. Go.
Green.
Okay, very good. Next one. Orange. Yeah, I spoke at a real food club in Marin one time and they said salmon. Your brain said red. So even though the instruction is yell out the color it's written in, your brain, just as soon as the slide got up there, said red. And actually in English, R is a very bossy letter. We have a speech therapist here, and you know that R is a very, but it just takes over your whole mouth in California's R. And so as soon as you read that word, your mouth was starting to form the R, and man, it's hard to overcome it and go blue, right? You see that little fight? That's because you have words in your head, and you hear that word in your head. You hear voices, and it's not always Satan coming at your head. So because of that, we call it actually, we have a lot of literacy people here, I'm glad to see, we call it a sound symbol system. We go to school and our teachers say this, and the kids already know, red, they already know that word. Red, sound it out. Well, what if you're deaf? If you're deaf, you don't have such a good sense of sounding out mechanism. As a matter of fact, you've heard English usually in very broken terms. All deaf people hear something, but this is the way a profoundly deaf person hears. So the big challenge for us in deaf education is to teach the deaf to read. And this statistic has been kept for years and years and years. And I don't know about our student here who went to France, but my interview, when I explain why you want this Rotary scholarship, my interview was quite interesting. I was from Reno, and actually the club that promoted me for the scholarship was from Sparks, but Reno is so close to hell you can see Sparks. I go down to this interview, and we were linked, our districts were linked, Sacramento to Reno at that time. So I came down for the interview, and there was this gal sitting there, and they sit you in a room with your competition. And I said to her, hi, I'm Jean from Reno, and she said, I'm from Sacramento. And I said, oh, do you go to Sac State? And she looked like she smelled something bad, and she said, I go to Yale. And I go, oh, heard of it. So then this guy came in, and he goes, hey, what are you up to now? And I haven't seen you in a while. And she goes, I'm going to Yale. And he goes, yeah, I'm going to Harvard. So he went in and had his interview, and then I went in and had mine, and there were a lot of interviewers from Auburn. I remember that at the table. There were a lot of, why would that be, Steve? But I don't know. There were a lot of Rotarians at the time. Steve Snyder, I just never see you here in Rotary. If I see Steve Snyder, he's in Chicago usually or something. So there were all these interviewers, and so I said, listen, I know that the person before me went to Harvard, and the person following me went to Yale, and I said, and I went to Fresno State. So it's kind of like a rose between two thorns, isn't it? So I came walking back down the hallway, and this guy, the gal says, wow, there sure was a lot of laughing going on down there. And I said, yeah, we were talking about you. And so I got scholarship. Okay, so anyway, let me see what my next slide is. Oh, it's black. So okay, stop. Back. All right, there we go. All right, and you'll see that there's interpretation down at the bottom in Portuguese because I gave a workshop on these reading methods that I learned in Portugal through Rotary. Anyway, so when I got there, I ended up studying with a professor of psycholinguistics. He was a psycholinguistics professor studying artificial intelligence. He fed the rules of English to a computer, and the computer came up with this kind of funky language. So he passed those sentences around to his colleagues, and he says, "What do you think of this generated language that the computer did?" And they went, well, this is deaf language, right? And he went, deaf language? What's deaf language? And they said, I don't know how to describe it, but it's like this. And he had this epiphany. Oh my gosh, a computer is deaf. A computer does not have an ear for the language. So as we're trying to teach computers to dialogue with us, there are stumbling blocks with any kind of language, and we internalize rules, typically not in our English class. Sorry about that, Steve, but not in our English class. We internalize them by hearing them. So for example, if someone says, I'm going home, and you've internalized that subject and that verb and the place, I'm going home, a deaf child is going to say, I'm going Safeway. And as the teacher, you're going to go, well, you can't say I'm going Safeway. You have to say I'm going to Safeway. Oh, okay. And so they'll go, I'm going to store. Okay. And so it's like, well, it's not I'm going to store. It's I'm going to the store. Okay. So pretty much you drill that enough, and they're going to go, bye-bye. I'm going to the home. Well, unless they're our age, they're not going to the home, right? They're just going home. So it's very difficult when you try to learn English through rules. Believe me, the British think they know it. They know this English language and said, what you have done with our language, you Americans, is terrible. But what the Australians have done is unforgivable. So we're in it. So what he said was, I really want to study the best computer on earth through the beta of the deaf. Okay, if I can figure out how the deaf are learning language and not learning language, then I'll know better how to teach a computer language. So he took a tack in his research for 3 years to study the deaf. Walks in the classroom for the deaf and says, what's your biggest challenge? Literacy, okay, and teaching kids language. And so he observed for a while, and he said, you know what? I see your first problem, because he's looking at it not from the eyes of a teacher. He says, I see your problem. The teachers of the deaf are doing all the talking. And he said, you need to give more opportunities for them speaking the language, because it's in speaking it yourself that you develop an understanding when you hear it out loud. And so they need to speak at length. But we were used to correcting kids all the time. We were used to fixing their grammar. Well, extrinsically, when you correct grammar, like the example I gave you, it's just not as powerful as self-correction. And on my research, and I helped them to collect data on their deafness research team. There was a boy, and he was retelling a story with this method that I'm going to show you right here. And he said, and then he don't go there no more. He doesn't go there no more. He doesn't go there, and he doesn't go there anymore. That is invaluable. If the child self-corrects, they got it, okay? But how are we going to get that opportunity? Well, children, as you know, all parents here have this propensity. They want to read that same dang book over and over. You provide them with many books, but oh no, they're going to have you read to them that same Goodnight Moon almost killed me. Okay, tried to hide that from my daughter. You know, it was a tough one. But they like to hear the same story over and over and kind of like to memorize it like they think you have. So Professor Wood, that I went to study with in Nottingham, says, I see the problem, teachers are talking too much. How are we gonna let the kids talk more? Okay, so why don't you just tell them the same story over and over, even if they're older? Tell them the same story over and over and over. Put the book down and say, now you tell me that story. And shut up. Don't correct the grammar. Don't say anything. Don't ask comprehension questions. Just listen to them tell the story. So this videotape right here is Teddy pretty soon after I got back off the scholarship. So it's a very old video. He was retelling this story in his own words using the pictures. He's not really reading yet. He's not reading the words. So this is Teddy.
It's small. Now I don't want it. It's too big. Now I don't want white. Now I don't want black. It's too dark.
He's waiting for me to say something. Okay, so this is Teddy many years later after doing story retelling repeatedly over the years.
Okay. Hi, I'm Teddy, and this is a book by William Shakespeare. The Tragedy of Julius Caesar was about mostly about casting Brutus and Caesar, and casting Brutus planned conspiracy with other people to kill Caesar because he wanted to become in power, and it ended up by Caesar's servant, Mark Antony, took the opportunity in power and took control, and ended up that Brutus would cast his type, and it was kind of weird.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good book summary. So you can see the difference between Teddy in all those years being able to improve his speech, to have a more natural speaking ability as he began to be able to retell stories and did the same thing, self-corrected, and his language became quite good. One of the things about the deaf also being illiterate is very few of them are able to complete college. Teddy completed 2 years of college in construction management, and he was able to purchase a home by the time he was 19, because he had worked for his dad's construction company. His dad paid him, and he ended up, the house was right by some railroad tracks, so it was a pretty easy purchase. And he said, I just take my hearing aids out and it doesn't really bother me, so the advantages of being deaf. My students ended up, remember long-term view, my students ended up that 80% of them went to college, completed some college, 2-year college or 4-year college, and a couple of them beyond that. So rather than having children graduate at a 4th grade reading level, they were graduating at a 10th grade reading level, learning these methods. Could I have told you that 30 years ago? No. A lot of people said when I got back from the scholarship, what did you learn? Do you think it's going to be valuable? And I know now that it does. But beyond that, because it's never good enough in Rotary, Janice Gage, actually, when you were talking about Janice asked me to be her district literacy chair. And when I was, during that term when I was literacy chair, I went to different clubs and did a lot of talking about literacy. And what do you think? I used that story. Hello. Oh. All right.
I have no idea.
The battery went dead? Okay. Well, I work with the hearing impaired. I can talk really
There's
loud.
another one in there.
Oh, there's a.
Yeah,
Is there another one?
should be.
Well, does it look like a gavel?
Yeah.
Oh. Oh, it is there. It is. Yeah, I'm in the dark. Okay, pretty cool. Guys. That's not working either. So we're.
On the bottom, on the
Oh,
bottom.
it's on one. Ah. Cool. I don't know where I was. Oh, so in my literacy talk, and actually this is not a literacy talk, believe it or not, I used to tell that story about the reader, and I'd say at the end, are there any questions? And it would be, what's the name of that movie that has all the sex in it? So Steve was saying if we could just make literacy sexy, you know, maybe we'd get a lot more participation. So now you have, anyway, never mind. He's going to go home and see The Reader. It's a very good movie. So you go to Rotary clubs, and when I was literacy chair, I was saying, hey, literacy's got to be a big emphasis of Rotary. So make sure when we give out those Thanksgiving baskets that we give books with the Thanksgiving meal. Okay, got to feed your mind. And when we have Santa Claus, make sure Santa Claus hands out books. And when we have any kind of program involving children, we need to include books. It just should be a natural part of everything we do. So a man came up to me, a Rotarian, and he said, okay, I teach in a football program for youth. And my neighborhood in Rancho Cordova, there's a lot of illiteracy, a lot of families, because they don't hear people read to them at home. And if you don't have people reading to you at home, you're just as deaf as Teddy. You're deaf to the language of reading. Once upon a time, there was a man, and he was in a great forest, and when he arrived, you know a book is being read versus conversational talking. Book language is its own language. The ramifications of the scholarship that Rotary sent me on had really a long distance reach, because the same kinds of techniques that work with my deaf students who did not hear literature work with kids who were never read to. So the next tape that you're going to see is years in advance. What we did in the football program, I don't have time to go over it here, but it was quite involved, is we involved literacy with reading. So we would hold up a word like interception, and the kids would count out the syllables interception, and then they would go over their hurdles, their interception. They would run a 3-syllable word, or they would run a 2-syllable word. We did all these football drills combined with literacy and read football books. And so this next video, well, yeah, we're gonna have to advance because my hidden slides aren't hidden anymore. You're gonna see them revealed. Keep going. Okay, no, this is Charles. Yeah, so good, it worked. So this is Charles. He was born drug addicted, and his mother is illiterate. And he came to the program, and so we had typically older boys read to younger boys, and same method that we use with this same book over and over and over all week through a summer program that we got a grant for through Rotary, and then they would tell the stories just like I did with Teddy. So here's Charles.
Tell me the story about Brad.
Brad had 3 sisters, and he lost him. His sister was older than him, and he practiced, and he lifted weights. That's it. That's it.
Now, is that, yeah, teachers that are here, that's teaching, isn't it? So of course it's not instantaneous. It takes a lot of work to wait for it, see if he remembers. Now he has built inside of him the scaffolding of storytelling. He knows there's a beginning, there's a middle, And as he begins to yank that out of his memory, he's going to do better at reading comprehension when he just learns how to remember what he's read. Charles improved to, he got to be able to read first grade reading books, it's a 2-year program, first grade reading books, and was able to read to his little sister. And his mom says, thank goodness you've taught Charles to read. Now he can get his little sister out of my hair. But I think what Charles has learned is that when you're around little children, you read to them. So Helen Keller said, you know, don't pity me because I am blind. Pity those who see but have no vision. And what Rotary had when they gave me that scholarship that was developed in 1917 was vision. Because when I was interviewed around that table, they didn't know what the ramifications would be. They just believed that if you send people to go to a foreign country in war, it's going to be one thing, but if you send them in peace to work on common cause, it's quite another. And so they had that vision. They didn't know the reach. They didn't know that eventually, 25 years later, that some Rotarian would approach me and say, okay, scholarship girl, let's take that thing you learned and apply it over here. And I've been able to teach these teaching methods, which is a little bit more complicated, of course, than I've been able to explain here, but in Belize, and I've done it in Guatemala, and you see here I was able to do that in Brazil. And the person that they got to translate for me into Portuguese when I taught it in Brazil was a Rotarian exchange student. So the reach of Rotary and all the connections that we make are the scaffolding from which to launch a lot of younger people's dreams and ideas. And this literacy method worked so well that I have a whole passel of students now who exceeded that level, and it was because of that scholarship. And I see that my time is up. We might have room for 1 or 2 questions, but I met with Bob and Steve at your coffee shop here before I came over, and they told me of all the incredible things that you are doing in literacy, and so heartening when I go home today, what I'm going to be thinking about and thanking God for is all of your efforts with literacy, and just if it's just one more kid that learns how to read. I've gone back to teaching. It's a dire situation out there as far as literacy is concerned. I'm in middle school and high school where you have kids reading at 3rd grade reading level, and it's a big problem. But all of us together, we can solve it, because it should not be an American problem. Thank you so much.
We have time for some questions. Any questions?
Hey, question?
When you teach a deaf person to read and they can relate the stories like the young man did earlier, how do I communicate with them?
Okay, that's a good question. So if you, I don't know if you heard me that microphone down, but how does he communicate back with a hearing impaired person? Boy, I wish I could give you my 7 years master's program. There are a few ways. A lot of kids today, they come with sign language interpreters. So, you know, they would interpret for you, and you just look at that deaf students and you talk to them and through an interpretation. However, I taught a lot of my students to speak. So when I taught them to speak, I didn't just teach them to speak. They use speech reading, and I train the little bit of residual hearing that they have. People say, what do? Teach them to read lips? I don't teach them to read lips. I actually forbid them from reading lips. I cover my mouth like this, and I go oink, oink, quack, quack when they're little ones, and they kind of hear that sound. Now they're only hearing moo. So from that, they know every time I say moo, they pick up the cow and I'm happy. They pick up the duck. So I train that little bit of hearing that they've got so they can utilize their hearing aids with that little bit of hearing and in combination with the speech reading. So you should be able to look at them if you speak slowly enough, not exaggerated, but directly to them enough, they'll be able to talk with you. So, and technology is like killer now for being able to teach the deaf to speak. So people go.
Thanks, Jean.